Highbridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents Along Comes the Association, Beyond Folk Rock and Three-Piece Suits, by Russ Giguere and Ashley Wren Collins. Forward by David Geffen. Read by Peter Berkrot. Forward by David Geffen. In 1967, our country was at war, and rock and roll music was the anthem of the anti-war protesters. I had dropped out of college and fudged a document to make it look as though I had indeed graduated from UCLA, all to keep my job at the William Morris Agency. And I was interested in advancing my career in the music industry by working with the best rock and roll talent. I was representing Janice Ian at the time, and she was on a split bill with the association at the Village Theatre, later the Fillmore East, in New York City. The concert promoter, Bill Graham, had accidentally put both Janice and the association down as headliners. Well, you can't have two headliners. There were afternoon and evening concerts lined up, but I walked into the theater to find Lee Liebman, the association's road manager, and Janice's manager arguing over who should headline. For me, the solution was simple. She headlines one, I said, pointing to Janice, and they, I nodded in the direction of 6 20-something men, headline the other. If anyone ever tries to use words to describe what happens when you hear beautiful music live, incredible, rich, complex vocal harmonies, it can't be done. You just can't do that feeling justice. No group sounded like the association. They were the real deal. Eager and ambitious to make my mark in music, I was determined to sign them. Pat Colecchio, the association's manager, rang me up to thank me for handling the headliner incident. Colecchio got the group out of their contract, with an agency that was thought to have mob connections, and I signed them to William Morris. The rest, as they say, is rock history. In this book, Russ Giguere has gone back in time, over 50 years now, to chronicle the experience of what it was like to be in the music scene in 1960s L.A., where everyone knew everyone, played and sang with one another in various bands at all the clubs, and forever changed music, how we hear it, how we feel it, and what it means to us. His memoir is candid, frank, and, at times, laugh-out-loud funny. If you know Russ, you certainly wouldn't expect anything less from the man who used to call my office and answer my assistant's question, "Who shall I say is calling?" with a dramatic pause followed by, "The Phantom." My assistant would patch Russ straight through to me without missing a beat. The Phantom days are long gone. The music business ain't what it used to be, that's for sure. But music made by the association, well, there's a reason it's still living on in the airwaves today. Continue listening and cherish. David Geffen, May 2018, Los Angeles, California. Disclaimer number 1. If you're sitting there wondering, what the hell is the association? Or maybe even, who does this Russ Giguere guy think he is? And what kind of a last name is Giguere? Heck, maybe you're even asking both of these things. Well, you might think I just mouth off at you. After all, I work in rock and roll, and those of us in the entertainment business sometimes get a reputation for being difficult. But no, you couldn't be further from the truth. Oh, sure, I'm the kind of guy who doesn't make a habit of caring about what people think. But since your curiosity is piqued, I'm patient and more than happy to explain. First of all, my last name is pronounced Giguere. If I had a dime for every time someone mispronounced it, I could buy the Taj Mahal. Second, the association was a beloved— my literary agent told me to use that word, and I'm not going to object— 1960s rock band. Yes, I came of age in the early 1960s. I'm that old. Probably best known for our chart-topping hits, Cherish, Along Comes Mary, Windy, Never My Love, and Everything That Touches You. In fact, Never My Love, Cherish, and Windy are 3 of BMI's 100 most played songs. Number 2, number 21, and number 61, respectively, of the 20th century. We have 1 double platinum record and 6 gold records, and we've sold more than 70 million records and had 7 top 40 hits. The original band consisted of 6 members, and I'm one of them. We have played stadiums, amphitheaters, concert halls, opera houses, historic vaudeville halls, movie theaters, the steps of city halls, high school auditoriums, colleges, universities, pop festivals, jazz festivals, river fests, racetracks, nightclubs, ski lodges, armories, zoos, parks, parking ramps, blocked-off streets, cornfields, private concerts, beaches on both the Pacific and Atlantic coasts, cruise ships, and even a converted dairy barn. We have played in every state in the Union and most of the provinces of Canada, as well as England, Holland, Germany, Belgium, Greece, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Uruguay. So, there you have it. I love playing tour guide, so that's what I'll be doing for you here. I'll be your tour guide through my experience of being in the association. I promise your tour will be anything but dull. There's some great music in store for you, as well as history, love, drugs. It was the 60s. And, well, maybe we should just go ahead and get started now that you know what's what. Have fun, kids. Disclaimer number 2. In 1966, Beechwood Music Corporation, a subsidiary of Capitol Records, Inc., together with Price Stern Sloan Publishers, Inc., published a book written by the association, Crank Your Spreaders. The word spreaders refers to the wing windows of your car that you had to push out or crank to open. It featured poetry, prose, illustrations, musings, and God knows what from the heads of the 6 of us in the band, which at that time included me, Terry Kirkman, Jim Yester, Ted Bluchel, Brian Cole, and Jules Alexander. As we told the Los Angeles Times about our literary offering, it's the first in a series of 1. Of course, in this same article, journalist Peter Johnson quoted us as saying, "If you are looking for some kind of label for us, you can write that the association is the answer to Edward Albee, the Taft-Hartley Act, and World War II. I'd like to take credit for that statement. It could have been me, but then again, it could just as easily have been Terry, who told Johnson he played underwater Chinese kazoo, or Brian, who claimed, "I played flower pot and volleyball on our last album." You pretty much could never predict what was going to come out of our mouths, and that's the way we liked it. There was a 1969 edition of Crank Your Spreaders that added the work of Larry Ramos. Our 6-man band became, for a time, a 7-man band, before Jules left for India and Larry was on the road with us, getting ready to take his place. Jules would later rejoin the band, at which point we became a 7-man band again. In both editions of the book, I wrote the following foreword, which still rings remarkably true, perhaps even more so, as I sit here 54 years later, marveling at my attempt to recollect memories of the times we spent and the music we made from the cobwebs of my mind. Many times I have asked myself why we should want to write a book. In answer to my own question, I ask, why should we write a book? The reply not only seems illogical, but it is illogical. But these answers must be questioned at another time. Books, as everyone is aware of, are, for the most part, printed on pieces of paper and fastened together with glue or staples or string and stuff, which is why we have chosen this media. We shall attempt to convey to the listener, listeners, or listenee, something that's neat, I bet. If you don't agree with all the views and ideas, that's all right too. Just don't come running to us when you're sorry later, because we'll all probably be sorry later ourselves. But right now we can all be sorry for many things together. I could give you several examples, but I'm sure you have enough. When writing a book, there are several rules that should be observed. It's the least you can do if you're not going to follow them. The most important of these are the guides on illustrating. 1. Do not use cheap, distracting illustrations of no consequence. 2. Use only those that merit observing, such as gas stations, apartments, milk, some small fires, or a gorilla or two dismounting. Even these, as snazzy as they are, can be disconcerting, so it is usually better to blend them in by printing the text over them, thereby creating a unity and feeling of oneness heretofore unknown in the physical world. Now you may begin the author purification. Thus, lock yourself in the bathroom for a duration of 72 to 345 hours, depending on the holiday, and eat the author purification diet, which is 1 meal a day eaten at 9:42 a.m., made up of 37 unleavened chocolate chip cookies and a quart of akadama, with a graham cracker crust. This meal may be eaten at any chosen speed, or taken through osmosis. Strive to maintain a constant state of confusion. This level is easily attained by continually asking yourself the musical question, what color is the sound of one hand laughing? And walking around a dead Cornish game hen at high noon. A craven coward? On the corner of Melrose and La Brea, chanting, "Don't act crazy." This will help cleanse you, both spiritually and mentally. Consider yourself warned, and sincere apologies if you're now craving chocolate chip cookies. Though there won't really be any illustrations this time around, I'm going to tell the story of the association like I remember it. Quite the feat when you consider how much marijuana I've smoked in my lifetime. I can't predict what you'll think or say or do. My version may differ from any of the other guys if you talk to them. But I can promise you one thing. It's gonna be a hell of a ride. So please fasten your seatbelts. I'll convey something neat, I bet. P.S. When you crank your spreaders, be sure to watch out for water balloons that may come hurtling at you through the window. Russ Giguere, Los Angeles, August 2019. Ray Bradbury was my hero. I never met my father. I get it. Your mind is probably jumping to the movie plot-worthy notion that he was some sort of dirtbag, a two-timing jerk, a ne'er-do-well. But that couldn't be further from the truth. My dad was a handsome fellow, a fine, upstanding Navy man who had been born in Flint, Michigan, and worked as a chief pharmacist's mate in the dispensary at the Portsmouth Navy Yard in New Hampshire. He married my petite, blonde, blue-eyed mother, Marguerite Bamberger, on a cold winter day on February 16, 1942. Not long after their honeymoon, just south of the White Mountains at Toby's Motor Court in Plymouth, he was shipped south on his second enlistment and returned home for short furloughs only. In August 1943, when Mom was 7 months pregnant with me, Dad was killed by a torpedo from a German U-boat off the coast of Virginia. Such was the fate gamble a young pregnant bride wagered, marrying a serviceman at the height of World War II. Russell Henry Giguere, Sr. Yes, that's right, I'm named after him, was on a gunboat called Plymouth. Yes, it had the same name as the town in New Hampshire where they honeymooned, which was actually a gift of William K. Vanderbilt to the U.S. Navy. Well, technically, he sold it to the government for $1, so I'd say it was a gift. It was reputed to be the finest yacht afloat, according to the Navy. That probably had something to do with the gold-plated fixtures and swimming pool it had when it was a yacht. Not that the Navy enjoyed those. That swimming pool became the mess hall and kitchen. On August 8th, 1943, my mom received a telegram from Western Union. The Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you that your husband, Russell Henry Giguere, Chief Pharmacist's Mate, U.S. Navy, is missing in the performance of his duty and in the service of his country. The department appreciates your great anxiety, but details not now available, and delay in receipt thereof must necessarily be expected. To prevent possible aid to our enemies, please do not divulge the name of his ship or station. 3 weeks later, on August 30th, New Hampshire Republican Senator Styles Bridges wrote my mother a letter. Dear Mrs. Giguere, I was shocked to hear that your husband has been reported missing in action, and want you to know that I am thinking of you in these trying hours. I hope sincerely that you may soon receive encouraging news, and that he will return to you safely. Very sincerely, Styles Bridges. All 2,265 tons and 265 feet of that ship had sunk in less than 2 minutes, and with it my father. The incident was described as follows. The Plymouth was a convoy escort ship, a patrol gunboat, PG, that cruised the East Coast, protecting the supply convoys so vital to the war effort. Its usual run was between New York City and Key West. On the evening of August 5, 1943, just after 9:30 p.m., the Plymouth picked up evidence of a nearby German U-boat on its sonar. While the Plymouth was maneuvering to drop depth charges on the U-boat, the German submarine fired a torpedo, which struck the 264-foot Plymouth abaft of the bridge. The incident occurred about 90 miles off the coast of North Carolina, almost directly in line with Kitty Hawk, famous for the Wright brothers' first manned aerial flight. This area was commonly known as Torpedo Alley, as German U-boats hunted down Allied convoys there, sinking over 300 ships, a vastly underpublicized reality of World War II. 75 men died, and 85 survived, most of them those who were lucky enough to jump overboard in time, and not drown in the mess of shipwreck, oil, smoke, fire, or sharks they had to battle 90 miles out at sea. Those who survived were rescued by Calypso, the Coast Guard cutter located just 8,000 yards away. I was born 2 months after the Plymouth sank, on October 18th, 1943. All of the bios on me out there will tell you that I was born in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I lived there in my grandmother's house with my mom. But truthfully, I was born in a naval hospital just over the bridge in Kittery, Maine. Why do I even bother mentioning all of this? You picked this book because you wanted to hear about the music, the hits, the touring, the fans, the sex, the drama, everything 1960s, everything rock and roll. But this story is how I best remember it, and if there's one thing you should probably understand up front, it's that I never knew my father. Why? Because I think that never knowing my father made me the kind of kid, and later man, who works hard, tirelessly, at whatever his job is. I watched my mother keep it together, gracefully, I might add, for me and my half-sister Judy, and later my other half-sister Nancy and half-brother Tyson. So to the extent that observing my mother's behavior influenced my life, it is certain that keeping it together, pressing on, was all I knew. Then again, perhaps my non-stop work ethic was my way of proving myself to the world, of making my mom proud for 2 people, her and my absent father. Though I wasn't conscious of it, and had for all intents and purposes a fairly idyllic childhood, before I ever became a musician, or a rock and roll star per se, I was likely, if not to me, to other family members, and at times to the outside world, the boy without a father. Life went on. Mom was still young and pretty. She had me and then was married again within 18 months. Who could blame her? It's tough to raise a child alone, and she wanted a husband for herself and a father for her son. Her second husband was a spineless guy. His mother lived with us and fed lies about me and anything and everything she could to her son and my mother. He was too weak to stand up to his own spiteful mother. Eventually, my mom had had enough and delivered an ultimatum. Either we live here or your mother lives here, but not both. By this time, my mom was pregnant with my younger sister Judy, but she had no problem walking out the door. My mother never asked him for a dime. The marriage was so quick, and I was so young, I don't even remember it. I'm simply recounting how it was all explained to me. What I do remember is sitting with Judy at the kitchen table when I was about 11 or 12, long after we had moved to San Diego. If my father was killed before I was born, but we were both born on the East Coast, and you're my little sister, I ventured, then where did you come from? Judy stared back at me, her eyes as big as saucers, as we both realized she didn't know the answer to the question either. We sat my mother down and demanded an explanation. What happened here? And that's how we found out there had been another husband sandwiched in the lineup. My memories of New England include snowball fights, and sliding from atop a mountain of snow piled as high as the second-story window of the house, all the way down to the ground below. Our backyard on Salter Street in Portsmouth had a river and a small dock, and my Uncle Bob, Aunt Jeanette, and cousins Paulie, Jan, and Bobo lived next door. I can still see the fishermen repairing their nets, and the lobster traps piled on the dock across the river. My grandmother would put me in a boat and row across that river to pick up my grandfather and uncle who worked at the Navy Yard. She also taught me how to do the Charleston when I was 4. I learned to sing songs like Rag Mop and Ragtime Cowboy Joe by listening to them on the radio. My mother's sister, my Aunt Millie, was married to a submariner named Jack Camp and lived in San Diego. During one fateful phone call to my mother in New Hampshire, Aunt Millie said, "Margie, there's no winter out here, and there's lots of men. Come out here." And with that, we packed up, moved west, and moved in with Aunt Millie and her 2 kids, my cousins Jack Jr. and Gail. Jack Sr. was away at sea more than he was home. Aunt Millie worked as an Arthur Murray dance instructor and taught me everything she knew. "Do I really have to learn this stuff?" I'd whine. "Russell," Aunt Millie would say patiently, "you'll always be grateful I taught this to you." Years later, when the association guest starred on Carol Channing's TV special, Carol Channing and 101 Men, where we appeared with George Burns, Eddie Arnold, Walter Matthau, and the U.S. Air Force Academy Chorale, we sang a shortened version of Along Comes Mary, as Along Comes Carol. And as they outfitted us in 19th century costumes, the producers asked, "Which of you guys can dance?" Larry Ramos and I were the only ones who raised our hands. And so we got our dance groove on 1960s style, with Carol in her miniskirt, white tights, and white boots. The YouTube video of our performance will show you I was having a grand time, since I'm dancing like a fool with a big grin on my face. And so Aunt Millie was right. But I get ahead of myself. San Diego was apparently good for me. I recently reread my mother's handwriting on the back of an 8x10 photo of me as a 5-year-old, not long after we'd moved there. She titled it, "Peck's Bad Boy," after a fictional archetype characterized for his naughty, mischievous behavior. She wrote, "His arms show up his nice tan. Isn't his face dirty? The man 2 doors down said he never saw such a dirty face, and so he just had to take his picture. He needed a haircut also, as you can see. I'm crazy about this, as you can't always get one like this so good. Under all the dirt, you can still see how swell he does look. He really has improved 100% out here." I guess Mom thought the West Coast sun was good for my attitude. Once we'd been in San Diego for about 1.5 years, my mother met a tall, handsome redhead by the name of Bob Bilyeu from Stillwater, Oklahoma. Bob had been a machine gunner in the Marines and served in the Philippines. He also watched as the flag was raised by Marines at Iwo Jima, and knew the war journalist Ernie Pyle. Bob came through San Diego, and once he got a taste of the Southern California weather, there was no way Bob was going back to Stillwater. He met my mother at the Hacienda Club on University Avenue, on a night when Roy Hogshead and his orchestra were playing. Roy was best known for his hit, "Cocaine Blues," which hit number 15 on the country music charts in 1948. Mom married Bob and had 2 more children, my half-sister Nancy and my half-brother Tyson. My new dad owned 2 top-of-the-line gas stations in San Diego and did pretty well for himself, so much so that he sold the gas stations and went into water softener and garbage disposal sales. Things went south, however, when Bob started writing bad checks and had to do jail time in Chino. Chino was a minimum security prison. When you went there, they'd tell you how to break out. Throw your jacket over the fence so you don't get cut, hop over and run like the dickens. Because if they caught you, you sure as hell weren't going back to Chino, which was a country club compared to the maximum security clink they'd send you to if you tried to escape. Bob wasn't the most terrible guy in the world, but he became a drinker and philanderer. We visited him once in Chino, but eventually my mother divorced him while he was in the slammer. I'll never know what made him write bad checks. But he was my stepfather from the time I was 6 until I was about 14 or 15, so he was the closest thing to a dad I ever knew. As a kid, I built forts and rafts, dug caves, and played cowboys and Indians. I preferred to play an Indian. We would see Arabs on television, and then we would play Arabs too, putting on robes and using broomsticks for horses. When I got to junior high, I took mechanical drawing, metal shop, wood shop, print shop, and calligraphy. I even received the 1957 Best Dancer Award. The title came with a 6-inch-tall plastic trophy for winning a competition at the end-of-the-year dance at Woodrow Wilson Junior High. I asked Barbara Dumler to dance because we danced together before and I knew she was good. "Oh, cool," she said. The contest came down to 2 couples, a very popular button-down duo, and me and Barbara. I was always on the fringes of the social scene. I didn't care about popularity. At the end of the song, the applause meter registered the same rating, which was totally bogus. There was no way the performances were equal, for both couples, so they had us dance to yet another song. We really dialed it up. After that, there was no mistaking the pair that deserved to win. When the second dance finished, they ran the applause meter test again, and Barbara and I were the clear winners. Thanks, Aunt Millie. In the 7th grade, I handed in a book report on a collection of Ray Bradbury short stories. It was either The Golden Apples of the Sun or The Martian Chronicles. "We can't accept this," the teacher said. "Why not?" I asked. "Because this isn't literature," she said, peering down her nose at me, drawing out the last word like it left a bad taste in her mouth. "What do you mean it's not literature?" I asked. "Have you read it?" "No," she admitted. "It's not on the list." As a young boy, I'd been an avid reader, devouring piles of books I carried home from the library. I read less by the time I was in high school. The lady who checked out the books would ask my mother, "Is he really going to read all of those?" "Oh yeah," she'd say, "some of them 2 or 3 times." By the time I finished junior high, I'd read something like 1,000 books. Everything Jack London ever wrote, everything John Steinbeck ever wrote, you name it. But I hated stupid lists and rules. I didn't love the system. In fact, I did whatever I could to bust it, so I turned in the same 3 book reports 3 years in a row. I remember one of them was Captains Courageous. I never even read the actual book, only the classic comic. There were no computers then, so it was easy to get away with handing in the same thing year after year. It's safe to say that none of my teachers thought of me as a sterling academic. But then again, I'm not writing this book to share my illustrious history of making straight A's. Now am I? Hoots at the Ice House, 1962 to 1964, with a little bit of 1960s history. Why weren't you in class? I was busy. Do you have an excuse? I said I was busy. The previous day, Mom had stood outside the front door to our house and watched me walk down the road from the bus stop. She had never done that before. When I reached her, she told me a policeman had stopped by the house to tell her I hadn't shown my face at school for some time. When the man calls on your mom personally, you know it can't be good. There was no dodging the firing squad on this one. I'd been caught red-handed, and it was fight or flight. The Hoover High guidance counselor barreled ahead. "Busy doesn't work, Mr. Giguere. You have to have a written excuse." "Well, what happens if I don't?" "You missed 100 days of school this year. You're out of school more than you're in it. They'll have to expel you." "Please don't expel me." I honestly couldn't give 2 shits. "Russ, you can't just stop going to school." "What's the alternative?" "You have 2 alternatives. You can go to the California Youth Authority, or you can get a job." The California Youth Authority, known today as the California Division of Juvenile Justice, was a division of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. In other words, the education, training, and treatment services it provided was basically jail for those of us deemed serious youth offenders. I guess I'll be getting a job. They set up 4 interviews for me, and I accepted the job that put me to work full-time as a shipping clerk.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?